Welcome to Health versus Wealth with Dr. Ben, where each week it's my great pleasure to meet fascinating people who tell us about the challenges they're facing with their work-life balance. I'm Dr. Ben Sinclair, and I wonder, do you struggle with your priorities? On the one hand, focusing on your work, business or career, namely your wealth, or on the other hand, looking after your health, which is so important. Over the past 20 years as a GP, I've seen many people spending too long on their screens, cutting corners on their sleep, diet or exercise. The result? Their work life's going well, but their health can suffer. I sincerely hope that my guests' personal and professional experiences may help you to improve your own health and life. Today's discussion on health versus wealth is going to focus on a topic that as a GP is very close to my heart. Please forgive the pun, but we're going to talk about gut health, which affects so much of our physical and also mental health. Now, my guest today is a business development consultant who's led a fairly stressful working life and who's struggled with his gut health for over 20 years, so much so that he's now become a gut health expert. So a warm welcome to you, Vaughan Wickins.
Thank you, Ben, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. It's great to have you on the show. Now, Vaughan, why do you believe it's so vitally important for the public to understand more about their gut health?
Ben, I think had I had a basic understanding of good gut function, the last 20 years for me could have looked completely different. And so, firstly, I want to encourage people. Make the decision to be the CEO of your own health. Get knowledgeable about basic gut function, but very importantly, what is normal when it comes to healthy bowel habits. And there is no option but to get that knowledge and importantly, figure out what works best for you. Because what works for you and your gut may not work for me, vice versa. And also importantly, as you go through life, suddenly what may have worked might stop working. So get knowledgeable and get an understanding of what normal is. The next thing is, I would love to help people avoid unnecessary pain and medical intervention. And that was something that I experienced, and I can go into that. But I believe I fell into that classic case of working with medical professionals, and they were there trying to help me, but we got caught treating the symptom and never actually getting to the underlying cause.
Okay, now I love this message of empowerment, and we're all about, empowering people with the right knowledge and then taking action. So I'm really looking forward to our chat. Now, let's talk about your experience, your early life. I know you grew up in South Africa and you had some quite stressful jobs to begin with.
Yeah, so I, as you can pick up from the accent, I grew up in Johannesburg, actually in South Africa, and I studied finance and then qualified as a chartered accountant, and I did my articles with Deloitte. My first job, however, was as a debt collector and a liquidator.
Ooh.
Yeah, let's say I wasn't the most popular person that people were happy to see. It wasn't all really baseball bats. It was quite sophisticated. A lot of debt collection calls really were done through call centers. However, after a few years of that, stress levels definitely were high, and I decided I need to make a change. Okay. And so in 2005, I made the decision to move to the UK.
Okay, so you moved to the UK to try and get away from the stress. I know you worked in the city of London. How was work there? Was it equally stressful?
Out of the frying pan into the fire.
Okay.
And I thought I'd never actually work for a bank, given the amount of time it takes to get things done and the constant restructuring. However, my first job was in the city of London, and it was in the area of mining finance, which I thought was quite interesting. And first for a South African bank, Standard Bank, and we focused on financing some of the big copper mines, the gold mines in Africa and emerging markets. And then later I worked for a US trading company, still in mining finance. So it was about 15 years. And yes, it was a stressful time, a time where I certainly focused more on the career, and the flip side of that is definitely the impact on the health.
Now we're talking health versus wealth for Dr. Ben is the title. So would you say the balance was in favour of more of the kind of the career wealth creation at that point in your life?
Unfortunately, the answer was definitely. It was, again, that it was investment banking, and now when I look at it, it's not only a city life that leads to that stress, but any any desk job, really, where people are bound to the desk and you're sitting for long hours during the day. Obviously, there's complications with high-stress jobs, whether you're in the medical world, the legal profession, banking, so many jobs, and it's because of the impact across those key pillars of health. And we could run through all of them, but I look back, and so many of them I kind of neglected.
So what did you begin to notice about your gut health during this time of great stress, and your lifestyle? How was your lifestyle at that time?
In terms of my gut health, what I now know, I don't believe the city was the cause of that. That was years of poor bowel habits, poor toilet habits. However, it certainly didn't help it. It would have exacerbated things. And it was actually during my time in the city, and I was in my mid-30s, where I say my gut issue first popped up. And I mean quite literally, because I say it is hard to miss this strange, unmistakable feeling of having something that feels like a golf ball wedged in your back passage.
Okay.
And
so we're talking hemorrhoids or piles here?
We are talking hemorrhoids.
Which is a very uncomfortable experience, isn't it?
Very unpleasant, very uncomfortable. However, what I now know, hemorrhoids wasn't really the problem, it was just the symptom. The underlying cause was constipation. And as I said, the city life really didn't aid that sedentary position that you're sitting for long hours during the day. So your physical movement is impeded.
And you're compressing your bowel and sort of not really moving around much.
Absolutely. In that sitting position, you can't breathe correctly. Your diaphragm is maybe moving 10% of its range. It's not massaging those internal organs. So you aren't breathing correctly. The digestion isn't kicked in. You're in that sympathetic mode state, which we could expand upon. But yeah, not optimum digestion. Your nutrition is impacted because you're often skipping meals or snacking. And
what were the food choices near where you worked? Were you able to access good food quickly and eat healthily?
Yeah, I wonder if not much probably has changed in the city, but lunchtime there were some really good options. Lots of salad bars, and you could get a mix of things. At one point where I worked, there was a canteen there, so there were loads of choices. You could make the health choices. It was presented. However, one of the key things that impedes healthy diets, and certainly gut health, is snacking. And that kicked in a big way. When you think about it, when you're under stress or you're in a hurried pressure situation, you reach for those high calorific foods, and you're talking your biscuits, your crisps, your chocolates. Not healthy for your mental state, your overall health.
Or your gut health. And then sort of high sugar, so feeding the wrong bacteria and driving that sort of sugar-fueled adrenaline rush state that probably is good for a short while, but not good for a long time.
Absolutely. And I'd say, in addition to that, that's for lunchtime. But when you're working those long hours in any job, but including the city, it means you're often eating dinner at your desk, and that certainly won't be home cooked. And then invariably, it was less healthier options.
So you're maybe eating, 2 meals sat at your desk that you haven't really control of yourself. You haven't prepared them yourself, and you're sat down all that time. It's an interesting combination of negative factors there, it sounds like.
Correct. If you're not sitting at the desk hours in front of the computer, you're sitting at the desk on conference calls, or one of my personal favorites, those hour-long monologue management meetings. So the encouragement for people really is get up, move around, walk around even during the management meetings. It might put people off. Ask for maybe a standing management meeting. Use the stairs whenever you can. Get up and have regular breaks. Really get up and move. And the other thing I'll never forget, we actually had a postural specialist come to our working space and have a look at how we sat the desk, and some very simple changes. Get 90 degrees in your elbows, pull your shoulders back, sit up well where your screen is positioned. So some great advice for make sure you're getting some movement, and movement creates motion. Or motion at least creates energy. It also creates emotion. So I want to encourage people, whenever you can, get up, move around from your desk.
It's interesting because I remember in the 80s they had these films where people were sort of power walking around the rooftop of these like New York Stock Exchange buildings with, running around the CEO with an enormous mobile phone. Ironically, there was something in the movement bit of those meetings that did appeal, and we're now kind of come full circle back to that, with standing meetings being far more effective. Instead of sending an email, walk to someone and speak to them, have a connection, have a conversation. And actually the human chemistry there is also helpful, because obviously we are in community, we're not on island, and actually if we're sat down in a little cubicle doing our work, we're going to be more and more isolated from those helpful prompts. So ironically, they had something right in the 80s, but maybe the sort of the jogging stress culture, the 5 a.m. club might not have been it. But we've now distilled that, and come back to full circle with standing and moving. It's a really interesting thing you mentioned, because standing desks have really come up, haven't they, with ergonomics and posture. A lot of people, if they can, actually standing up, a second half of the day. I've got some patients and some clients who visited who even have a treadmill under the desk. So they're actually doing their work on a standing desk whilst on a treadmill for the last couple of hours of the day.
Awesome. And I actually remember the first time I saw that, and I was on a long conference call with some training, and I watched this one chap, and his head was swaying, and for maybe the first hour we wondered, did he have some kind of tremor or nervous tick? And afterwards he said, while you've all been sat there for 3 hours, I've just walked a bunch of kilometers, so I'm ahead of the game.
Welcome back to Health versus Wealth with Dr. Ben. For those of you joining us late, I'm talking to Vaughan Wickins, a gut health expert. Now, Vaughan, tell us more about the health issues that you suffered. How did you tackle them, and what have you learned in the process?
Sure, as I mentioned, I fell into that classic position of working with medical professionals to treat the symptom, but not actually getting to the underlying cause. So the symptom, these painful hemorrhoids, but really the underlying cause, as surprising, was constipation.
Okay.
And I want to encourage people, don't do what I did and put off seeing a medical expert for years. I simply delayed and procrastinated. But what it meant for me the last 10 years, and let's summarize in terms of numbers, I've had 3 rounds of injections to shrink the hemorrhoids. I've had 2 sigmoidoscopies where they inspect the lower part of your sigmoid colon, 1 colonoscopy, quite an interesting experience. It feels like they pump you full of so much air, more than in the Virgin hot air balloon. I've had 1 round of Rafalo technology. A probe is
what's Rafalo technology?
Radio frequency. That insert a probe and zap the hemorrhoid with radio frequency. And I know it sounds like some kind of alien abduction story.
I was going to say, it sounds like you're some kind of experimental object.
It is, and let me tell you, it felt a lot warmer than sitting on a Volvo seat heater.
It's quite hot and painful, is it?
It was at the time. It good that I had some breathing practice under the belt.
And they never warn you with these things that they're going to be painful, do they?
They don't. I had a nurse squeeze my hand, and I believe she said something like, "Just breathe, dear."
Well, lucky you knew how to breathe.
Absolutely. So it was that. Following, in addition to that, I had 1 round with a biofeedback therapist. I had 4 rounds of traditional banding, where they literally place elastic bands over the hemorrhoids, and more inspections been by doctors, nurses, and experts than I care to imagine.
These things are quite taboo, and we don't often talk about them. Do you think that's why you didn't go to the doctors sooner?
Absolutely. Maybe it's just because I'm South African, or it's the 10 years of treatment. I actually got so relaxed about that. But to your point, one of the biggest issues in gut health is constipation. And I spoke to a gastroenterologist, and that's literally what they said. The biggest problem underlying so many GI tract issues is constipation. And that might sound surprising, but I've given that a lot of thought, and I actually agree with him, and I'll tell you why. We don't talk about it. So they did a study in the UK, and they found that more than half of the men they surveyed found it equally as embarrassing to talk about erectile dysfunction as it was to talk about bowel habits and bowel health. So we don't talk about it. And constipation is far more prevalent than we think. So we don't talk about it, which also leads me to believe the stats are understated. And if you look at them, they say that in the UK, more than half of us over the age of 50 will experience constipation. And
That's a lot.
that is a lot. But in the US, it's even more. They reckon at least 80% of the population will experience constipation at some stage.
Can we define constipation here? Because actually, when I was at med school, we were taught that, sort of bowel action, sorry to get biological, is anything normal could be anything from going once every 2 days to going, 4 times a day. And it's a huge range, isn't it? What would your definition of constipation be in a modern kind of lifestyle way?
The way I approach this, Ben, is actually quite interesting. When I provide an educational talk or coaching on gut health, that's actually the first thing I do is turn that around and put the question to the person. So I say, what would you say is normal when it comes to healthy bowel habits, and specifically going to the toilet for a number 2, or what I like to call a pit stop? And I give everyone an option. So option A, do you think it's normal to go once a day? Option B, do you think it's normal to go multiple times a day? Or option C, do you think it's normal to go every 2 or 3 days? So, Dr. Ben, not to put you on the spot, but I wonder, what would you say between A, B, or C? A, once a day, B, multiple times, C, every 2 or 3 days?
Well, here's the thing. I don't think that's an easy question to answer, because in my experience, I know that there are a lot of different clients and patients I've worked with have a whole variety of what they consider normal. I also think neurology comes into it, and there are actually some genetic factors here where familial traits, neurodifference, and the actual innervation of the bowel may determine, what's sort of the default for those people. So I've got some patients for whom they would be termed slow bowel, so maybe they only go every 3 days, but they don't report major problems. That's normal for them. Now, for me and my family, normal probably would be, at least a couple of times a day. But then I think the question is, are you moving away from your normal? So for me, constipation is moving away from a regular movement that you have been used to throughout your life. And if that's a change, this is assuming you're doing healthy diet, exercise, hydration, and this sort of thing. Then I think you are becoming constipated. There might be some element of bloating, discomfort, so it becomes more pathological, a slowdown from your normal. Is that a fair answer?
That was an absolute excellent answer, and I would expect nothing less from you, Dr. Ben. But in a way, it was actually a trick question the way I pose it to patients, because what I would say is you could have answered A, B, or C,
Exactly.
which is in effect what you did.
Yeah.
And you would, if you agree with the common medical position out there, you would be right. But here's the thing. What I've come to realize, I believe it's actually complete nonsense. And I align with your family position. I align with a small group of doctors that believe you should be going to the toilet multiple times a day. And as one of my prior colleagues, Professor John Lennox, used to say, nonsense remains nonsense no matter who is saying it. Okay. And Dr. West Jones says this: it doesn't matter what you think is normal, it matters how your gut was designed. And he also says this: you were designed to poop more like a cow than a cat.
That's a very interesting statement, because I don't think many humans would think that they should be having a bowel movement like a cow, because I think that's just not what we've programmed in the modern Western mindset to think is normal. And yet there may be so many factors that feed into that. So I'm interested to know, you've learned so much from this experience. Tell me more about your own kind of journey from these concepts that you've discovered. How did you go on this journey? I mean, these people you've spoken to, the people who you would say were the touchstones of your knowledge, was there a sort of light bulb moment for you where you suddenly realized that you should be going more often? What happened?
Maybe I can answer it in 2 parts. So firstly, what really kickstarted me moving away from just simply treating the symptom for more than 10 years. And that was a very specific day, and I recall. And I was with my wife at the time, and we were donating platelets. And on that specific day, I was denied the ability to donate. And the reason I had failed the heart rate test and the blood iron test. On the heart rate, they said my resting heart rate was low, but I knew I was quite fit at the time, but I'd failed the iron count. And at the time, I had gone through a bout of bleeding every time I'd gone to the toilet for nearly a year.
Wow.
And I knew I'd failed the iron count because of that. And I remember getting really angry and frustrated and saying, this has got to stop. And that triggered me going back home and researching everything I could, buying a ton of books on bowel habits, listening to experts, watching educational videos, reading the latest scientific studies, and importantly, experimenting to see what could really work to kickstart healthy gut motility and bowel function. And that's what ultimately led to me writing a book.
Tell us about your book. Obviously, the distilled knowledge of all these years of experience has been poured into this resource. You've also produced some mini courses and that kind of thing. Tell us more about the resources that you're producing.
The book came about because I said after all of this research, I realized one of the common problems we all have is this, that we simply do not know what is normal when it comes to healthy bowel habits. And I realized there was so much misinformation out there, and unfortunately the view being put out there in the medical world I thought was unhelpful at best but harmful to a lot of people at worst. And while I didn't want to make people mentally as well as physically constipated, I thought a book or a resource sharing what I'd learned from a lot of these doctors, but loads of infographics, lots of imagery, but importantly practical solutions that could help them. And the book I wrote is called GutWise, and that GutWise is an acronym for a holistic approach to the gut, but importantly, in one of the sections, it touches on a secret that I found could really unlock gut health and gut motility.
Okay, you've got my interest there. What's this big secret? Can you tell me? Or would you have to read the book first?
As part of the research and experimenting with what works, well, I came across a lot of references to utilizing the diaphragm. And I started to look at these exercises, and I very quickly dropped down this rabbit hole of the diaphragm and breathing. And it was fascinating. And I thought the gut was so little understood, exactly the same for breathing. So I decided I'd learn a little more, and I eventually landed up qualifying as a breathing instructor. And I will give you 2 quick little bits of guidance on why breathing is so key for the gut. Number 1, it activates your parasympathetic nervous system. And number 2, that diaphragm is one of the most powerful muscles in your body, and it is able to mechanically put pressure on your whole bowel region.
Wow. I mean, in modern times, we've really got into, I think, the microbiome, breath work and gut health, and kind of in nutrition has really come up. I think especially since COVID times, people started eating their own food, maybe growing their own food, cooking for themselves if they had more time and they were in lockdown. And I think a lot of people then got into things like yoga that were a bit more about, sort of diaphragm control, breath work, and also helping the automatic nervous system to sort of work with you. Tell me, what are the other bits of the GutWise that you wanted to talk to us about? So what do they stand for?
If I run through them then from the top. So G, we've touched on already, general knowledge, but importantly, a personalized strategy. And this is where we're going, with nutrition, personalized approach. But importantly, as I said, what works for my gut may not work for yours. So there's no substitute to outsource it. You need to find out what works for you. U, the secret, unlock diaphragmatic power in breathing. T, toilet optimization in 2 areas, position and frequency.
Okay.
W, the basics, water and workouts. So you're hydrated and physical movement. I, integrate fiber and supplements. An interesting one. S, support with laxatives and enemas. Laxatives are heavily misunderstood, and there's a lot of myths I debunk around that. And then the last one, E, engage your pelvic floor. And it's a web of muscles, a group of muscles that we often forget about. And
often men think pelvic floor is all about women and, post-birth continence and that kind of thing. But having had a few prostate cancer patients, I know that pelvic floor is just as important for men in terms of this function. I'm intrigued to know your views on laxatives. Now, as a doctor, I was always cautious about, prescribing laxatives, because the worry was that people would just end up permanently taking laxatives that might be unhealthy or produce malnutrition or, sort of a fast bowel or a dependence on these things, or almost what we'd call an atonic bowel, where the bowel doesn't move unless you give it lots of enemas or laxatives. What's your view on enemas and laxatives, and define those for me, because they may be not just medical in your view?
Firstly, I would say to people, use them. Only the right types, Ben. So very quickly on laxatives, I'd say the right types are your osmotic types. Those are laxatives that draw water, liquid into the bowel area. And I believe they can actually help tone your bowel muscles, get it helpful. And as you said, it's the history, just very scared of laxatives.
Yeah.
Everyone, including, I believe, those in the medical world. And that's because when you look back, there were chemicals like phenolphthalein, and they did create dependency. But you've got healthy, good options of laxatives, and it should be a key pillar in terms of gut health. And in the natural world, you think of prunes. They high in sorbitol. They can assist, but but I don't get too hung up on types. But if you look, the right osmotic types, look for ingredients, PEG or macrogol. And it's the same thing, polyethylene glycol or macrogol. It was just a good rebranding exercise. These are good osmotic laxatives that can draw water into your bowel, and we will all experience it, this constipation at some point. And a classic example is travel. So I'd say be proactive. Do not be scared of those laxatives. Have them only the right type. And then lastly, on enemas, I'd simply say, I watched an episode of Bear Grylls once, Man versus Wild, and he gave himself an enema in a little dinghy out at sea. So I would encourage people, if Bear Grylls can do it, maybe it's something you should put on your bucket list to try. But also, at some point, you are probably bound to have a colonoscopy, and you may very well have to give yourself an enema in any case, so you might as well get some practice.
So get used to it, but hopefully not in a dinghy at sea.
Bit extreme.
Exactly. Now, Vaughan, I always ask all of my guests about their own health and diet and exercise and lifestyle now. You've been through this amazing sort of transformation into gut and breathing and transformed your own health. How's your health now? And particularly people who are highly motivated like yourself sometimes struggle with sleep. Tell me about that as a particular factor of your lifestyle.
Yeah. I like to look at all the pillars for health. And I know we discussed, you've got your 3 basic pillars. So as you said, we've got here your sleep. We've spoken a lot about movement, physical activity. We've spoken a little bit about diet. So sleep, the science is astounding on sleep. And I've heard people say, there's a doctor advocating that other doctors should prescribe sleep to patients. And a study I read recently just said, even just 2 days of subpar sleep, of sleep deprivation, it can have the same impact on your gut microbiome as high blood sugar levels. So sleep, it allows your body to reset, allows your brain to just relax, reset, form down those memories. It allows your immune system to reset, allows your hormone levels to normalize. It is so important across the board, and very importantly what we're talking about today, digestion, and allows your gut lining that to heal itself. So sleep, absolutely crucial. And I believe now there's no exact amount of time to sleep. For me, it's averaging around somewhere between 7 or 8 hours, but more importantly, it's getting into a rhythm, trying to go to bed at the same time each night and wake up at the same time, and waking up often more naturally and normally instead of having an alarm clock. Yeah,
good call. I think something I read recently about circadian rhythms seemed to really resonate there with what you said. And a lot of people are actually trying to get out early in the morning, barefoot on the grass, get the morning sun, to hit their eyes, and then ideally getting exposure to sunlight at least at lunch, noon, and again in the evening to sort of help that circadian rhythm with melatonin production and cortisol release. And you're doing a triathlon, so I guess sleep is really important for recovery, right?
Is absolutely. Muscle recovery is a key one. Yeah, and tissue repair. As I said, in that gut also, people don't realize the cells in your gut, they probably rank as one of the quickest turnaround times in terms of dead cells being flushed out of your system and regenerating new cells. So cell repair, cell recovery, muscle growth, really key, and sleep can really support that.
Do you do any journaling or anything to help you sleep?
For me, the most helpful thing was the guidance to avoid looking at your phone, avoid screens right up until you go to sleep. And that's something that we try to do. Also, my wife takes it a step further. She actually takes her phone and puts it not even on a bedside table, puts it often out of the room or on a table across the room. So she's forced to leave it, that she's not looking at when she goes to bed last thing. So that's been a top tip and something that I've found incredibly helpful. Journaling for me is something that I do typically in the mornings.
In the mornings, yeah. And I wanted to ask you more about the importance of breathing, but we've run out of time, Vaughan. It's been so fascinating learning more about your journey through gut health. Can you come back and talk to us about breathwork next time? Because we didn't get into the diaphragm this time.
I would absolutely be delighted to.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to our next chat, and thanks for coming in today.
Pleasure.
So I do hope you enjoyed today's episode of Health versus Wealth with Dr. Ben, and I hope it may help you improve your life and health. You can also take one easy step by achieving that right now by subscribing free on your usual podcast platform. And if you'd like to be a guest on the show, you can email me on podcast@drfinlays.co.uk. I hope you'll join me again, but for now, it's goodbye from me, Dr. Ben.